Good morning, everybody. Today, I want to discuss a very topical issue that is in everybody's mind, the high inflation that has begun in Australia, and what should be done about it. And my thesis, which I'll explain and hopefully you'll agree, is that this is completely man-made inflation caused almost entirely by the policies of the Liberal and Labour parties, who are completely irresponsible, incompetent, and unfit to govern. But before I do that, I just want to talk about the price system. Now, this is something, Adam Smith had discovered the invisible hand, but it was Friedrich Hayek, who outlined the magic of the price system. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics and one of the very best thinkers in the world history. And so, for example, I don't know if you can see this book. This is The Constitution of Liberty. And in this book, among many others that he's written and articles, Hayek talks about the role of the price system in telling us what to do. So it's very interesting that we don't think about it, but the price system actually tells us what to do, what career we shall follow, what things we shall buy, what should we produce, and virtually everything, all our economic actions are determined by the price system. And this issue of the magic of the price system should be kept in mind, that it is not something, it is based on knowledge. This is one of the most important findings of Hayek. It is based on knowledge that is captured and known only to individuals across the world. It is diffused knowledge. It is not aggregated, and it is impossible to aggregate that knowledge. So when we start thinking of dabbling with the price system, we should be aware that it includes the knowledge of all the human beings on the planet, which is completely diffused, cannot be ever consolidated. Prices are a relative, factor. They sort of tell us the relative price of different things, of different activities, and anything that changes significantly in the prices is because of distortions, which are almost always created by the government or the government's body, in this case, the central banks. And I'll come to that in a minute, because we need to understand that prices are not determined by any one individual. They are a combination of the determination and preferences and purchases and everything else of all of us on this planet at the same time. And we also must keep in mind the bigger picture, that due to a large number of reasons, I'll talk about them shortly, prices for most of the things have fallen over the past 20 years. In fact, over the 30 years as well, if you consider computers. I can also say that except for things that the government supplies, education, health, security, justice, the government has never, shrunk its size and costs. The taxes have always risen, although they remain a relatively constant share of the total GDP. The government does not become more efficient. The government does not charge us less. The government keeps charging us a vast amount of money, and that generally goes equal to or higher than the consumer price index. But for everything else, practically everything else, prices have fallen because production has increased. We have become much more effective and efficient as producers. So I purchased my first computer in 1990, and I was calculating today that it cost me around $5,000, a price of a used car at that time. And in due course, I've never purchased a computer for more than $1,500. In fact, my latest computer that I'm using right now is about $1,000. And these are, of course, much more powerful than the first computer. So we are looking at productivity that's boomed over the last 20, 30 years. Globalization has been a critical factor in reducing the cost of production all over the world. Of course, the main thing has been the information technology, artificial intelligence, and so on, which has collapsed the prices. So this trend, it has not changed. Let me assure you that this trend has not changed, and in fact has speeded up over the last 2 years. So what we are seeing now in terms of the price rise is almost entirely caused by the governments, and in this case, the Liberal and Labour parties. So inflation has always been the handiwork of distortions created by central banks and governments. So let me talk about first the central bank. In a simplistic manner, and this is not the actual way it works, but it is a simplistic way to consider an interest rate as the price of money. So even money has a price. You want to give somebody your money, $100 today, you give somebody else, you expect to get $102 or $105 in the future. The proportion that tomorrow's money is worth less today, that proportion is effectively the interest rates at 2%, 5%, etc. And if left to itself, markets would set the interest rates based on a number of factors which are well beyond the scope of this discussion. But what you would see is interest rates constantly changing in the market to meet the demand for money. But two things have happened in the past 100 years or so. First of all, private banking has been substituted by central banking. And central banks have a great interest in fixing interest rates. So they administer interest rates. And so their intervention, which has also meant that they prevented the private sector from producing money, so that they are the monopolists in terms of production of money. Earlier, the banks used to produce money. That's how money started in the world. It was all entirely privately produced, backed by gold and other things. But now we have the central banks, fiat money, etc., where they have no constraints in the production of money, and they constantly tinker with interest rates. They administer the interest rates for us. And here is one single rule, that there is nobody in the world who knows the complete picture of the economy, and so central banks can never possibly know that, and so they will always either set the interest rate too low or make it too high, and so on. So they're simply incapable. This is a fundamental failure that they can never overcome, no matter how many millions of years they operate. Central banks will always fail to set interest rates properly. And also they will fail in keeping the money supply at a modest controlled level, because there's no backing now of any gold or assets, so they can produce any amount of money that the government wants. The government wants to borrow money. Okay, fair enough, I'll print money, and that's how the system works. Okay, so central bank is basically a branch of the government, and let's not forget that. It's independent to only an extent. And therefore, this tinkering with the price of money has been one of the biggest failures, I would argue, of the past 100 years. And it has reduced the price of actual value of money dramatically all over the world, wherever there's fiat currency. And of course, in the recent past, we've had government dramatically tinkering with the markets. So today's inflation is largely, I would argue, the outcome of the lockdown policies. Both the Liberal and Labour governments have overreacted massively during the COVID pandemic. I've explained this in many writings and this and that. And so that this was basically a 50 to 500 times less lethal than the Spanish flu. They called it the Spanish flu. They copied the Chinese policies, lockdowns, everything. They shut down business, they shut down industry, they shut down everybody. And they also caused a lot of harm by borrowing money and dumping it to people and giving it to people for sitting at home. So we had shops in my, Bulleen Plaza, where I go, completely shut down. I asked the people what happened. Well, they got the money from the government. The nail salon and other things, they got the money from the government to sit at home. And so there was a much lower production, but money was being printed out and given off to these people. And it was totally unnecessary, completely wrong. And I'll come to that separately, and I've already done it many times. What did people do when they were stuck at home? Many of them did some home improvements, so we saw a bit of a demand increase for those kind of things. They went to Bunnings, bought a few things and fixed their homes. That is good. They also had money sitting with them, which they wanted to spend on travel if they couldn't. Now they're starting to spend that money as the lockdowns come down. But then they find the goods aren't even available many times, and everything is bidding. The competition, the combination of all these factors, greater amount of money, running after fewer goods, basically that's what has driven up the prices. Remember that the lockdowns were entirely man-made. This was completely man-made tinkering. It was a disaster for us to have these policies, because they were completely unnecessary. And this is unfortunately not only happening didn't only happen in Australia. It happened all over the world, which meant that worldwide shortages started to happen. Shipping was not moving adequately, properly. Shipping containers rose, and all that stuff. So basically, supply chains broke down. The industry was waiting for computer parts. They were not coming, so the cars were not being produced. And so the used car prices went up, and all that stuff happened. So we know that this is actually completely man-made, 100% man-made issue. The last time we had a similar pandemic was the Asian flu or the Hong Kong flu. None of this happened. There was not the slightest effect on the economy in terms of the stock markets, the inflation. Practically nothing changed during these pandemics, which were of similar magnitude to the COVID pandemic. These guys have behaved very badly, and they should not be rewarded with being voted back to government. I don't think that these people are competent. I believe they're completely incompetent. They have imposed the worst policies on Australia, and they have caused us this massive inflation. This is directly caused by the Liberal and Labour parties. Let me explain that to you. And let's be very clear. Nobody else is out there who's caused this thing. On top of that, they have been, in the past, driving up the prices of homes, etc., by reducing the supply of land through zoning and other, requirements for densification to prevent densification. So, when people want to build on their own property, something where there's a demand, and these guys say, no, you can't do that. What does it mean? It means there are fewer houses, fewer homes. Therefore, obviously the price goes up. So everywhere you see the government has been tinkering with the markets. They are the largest contributor to the inflation. Let them not tell you that this is somebody else's fault. No, it's not. Okay, I will give them a bit of a thing that this is also, for example, some other countries did some stupid things, so that's one. The second is the Ukraine war. That has also been an external factor. So to a very small extent, let's say that these guys who are given an out, and so, okay, they can blame somebody else. But I would say 80 to 90% of the increase in inflation today is caused directly by the Liberal and Labour parties and their central bank. The other one that is happening is that industries are no longer interested in producing in China and other places because there are a lot of geostrategic issues that have come up in the last 2 years. China is no longer very reliable, and so companies are starting to move back their production, which means that during the transition period, there's further reduction in production. So ultimately, there'll be more employment in the West because of this particular move back home. But no, there's actually at the moment, there is a bit of a problem with companies shutting down their production and bringing it back home as well. So it's a perfect storm. Geostrategic issues, Ukraine war, lockdowns all over the world, but I would say 80 to 90% caused purely by the Australian government, politicians, and RBA. Now, what can be done? That's the question everybody asks, and I sort of go back to the original thing about the prices having a long-term downward trend, except in things that government produces like education, health, etc., which is always rising. But for other things, prices have been coming down, and they will ultimately continue. That trend will continue. The productivity trend, in fact, has increased, sharpened over the past 2 years, with more companies moving to IT, artificial intelligence, and so on. So these improvements will ultimately create a glut and cause the prices to really, really fall. This will happen for sure, without any doubt. But when will it happen? Probably, take some time. The other one is that RBA is going to start raising interest rates. Now, I'm recording this just before the RBA meeting today, so I'm not sure what's going to be done today. But I would say that as the interest rates, RBA has no choice. They're going to have to raise the rates, and they should have done it a long time ago. But as the interest rates rise, the home price growth will slow down because people can't afford those big mortgages. Then, as the house prices slow down, the people who are renting will also demand and bargain down the rents. So that's going to be part of the automatic adjustment that's going to happen soon. The other is, as the interest rates rise, consumers who've been actually splurging, because what's the point of holding on to money, because it's getting you 0% interest in the bank. 0.15%. That's the kind of interest if you put in, $5,000 or some such thing. It has been ridiculous, right? The last few years, where you get no money by putting it in the bank. But now that there might be some interest available to money in the bank, people might take in some fixed deposits and so on. And that money will then move away from direct demand, consumer demand, into savings, which is actually going to move towards investment. So there'll be more investment, hopefully, in the long run, with that money being deployed for more productive use. That will increase production as well. So these automatic adjustments will do the heavy lifting. Let me not be very clear. The price system is not under the control of the Australian government. Nobody in the Australian government controls the prices. Yeah, they can probably influence some petrol prices and so on through the fuel excise, but they can't control the world global petrol price, okay, so oil price. So we need to be very clear, this is well beyond the capacity of the politicians, except to damage things. They can definitely harm the system, but they can't really improve it. What should the government do? Well, the big thing they can do at the moment, they've started with the excise, is cut the taxes. Now, keep in mind here, this is a big issue ultimately for the people, because we've been fleeced, we've been cheated by these guys on a very large scale, and they've got a mountain of debt, $1 trillion that's got to be paid back. So as the interest rate rises, the interest payments on this debt is going to increase, which means that somebody's going to pay the bill for all this rubbish that they've done in the last 2 years. So cutting taxes is not a long-term solution. They need to cut the size of the government. That's what they should do. I should have probably written that down here. They should reduce the size of the government itself and cut down the unnecessary costs of managing the government. The other is they need to reduce the burden of regulation. We have a vast bureaucracy in town planning and environmental regulation, among others, and that actually completely shuts down production. Well, not completely, that's a bit excessive. It reduces production dramatically in Australia. We need less subsidization. The politicians love to subsidize this sector or that sector. It's politically very popular. But each time they put that subsidy there, they're basically encouraging the bad guys and taking the money from taxpayers who could have spent it on a more useful thing. So let each sector, it doesn't matter what it is whether it's coal sector or renewable energy or any other sector, let them stand on their own feet. No subsidies for any industry at any cost. Zero subsidy. That's the kind of minimum policy we should have, that we will not subsidize any industry. The last thing that they could do is to increase productivity by increasing competition and making investment in Australia more easy. Now, this is generally a place where we've not had much reform for a very long time. Competition policy is extremely hard. People are always balking at improving competition in Australia, and so we've not had significant competition reform in Australia for a very long time. So this is one thing we need to go focus on: competition policy, and also to make investment easier for anybody in the world, except maybe Chinese, to come and invest in Australia. That will increase production and so on. Now, there are some ideas floating around, bad ideas. And, anybody with the basic economics, and I think some of these little fringe parties that have arisen in the last, few months, they don't have any economist of any caliber. And so they've been talking of price caps and, potentially quotas and all this kind of thing. And look, any of these ideas, with the most elementary understanding of economics, you will know that they will actually be counterproductive. They will do worse. They will do more harm than any good. So, for example, somebody says, let's put a cap on mortgage rate. We'll fix the cap. We'll fix the rate on mortgages. I don't want to go into details. This is such a really stupid idea. I can't even think how anyone can think about this. But let's not even go down that path. What we need to do is to remember that the governments do not control prices. The governments can only make prices worse. They need to make it easier for businesses to operate. They need to stop restricting them on working. They need to stop subsidizing things. They need to potentially reduce the size of government and even cut taxes to the extent possible. So this, if it's done, I suspect the inflation, because remember, there's an automatic adjustment that's going on. And the long-term trend is negative. That means prices will keep falling. We're talking of a zero marginal cost economy in the long run, where because of robotics and other things, there will be virtually zero marginal cost for production. So we're talking of a dramatically different technologies coming in the future. So we except for services and so on, which obviously require human beings for the vast bulk of production, we expect robots to do that in the future. And the marginal cost of that is pretty low, zero actually. And so we're talking pretty close to a non-stop reduction in prices over the next 20, 30 years. So this is a blip that has been caused entirely by the Liberal and Labour parties. Now it's up to you, the voter, to decide whether you want to reward them with your vote or actually choose the Australian Federation Party, where people like me are working to create a sensible party that will not be driven into panic and hysteria like these parties were. Then we have a party of debate and open discussion. So no, we're not going to go and do stupid things. Also, like the fringe parties that are talking about price caps and mortgage caps and so on. We don't do such stupid things, okay? We talk sense. We talk proportionality. We don't go hysterical. We're not hysterical and we're not stupid. So I hope you get the point. All right, that's what I wanted to sort of outline today. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.